Hi, folks. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri, and our next guest is the neurotic mastermind behind the movies. Movies like The Addams Family, Men in Black, Get Shorty, the TV show An Unfortunate Series of Events. But being a neurotic mastermind isn't all it's cracked up to be. In his new book, Barry Sonnenfeld, Call Your Mother, Sonnenfeld goes all the way back to his relationship with his parents and up through his rise in Hollywood to detail exactly how a person as unique as himself could have made it where he did. I'm so excited to talk to you, Barry. Thank you so much for being here.
A pleasure to be here.
Is it okay that I called you a neurotic mastermind? I feel like most of the book is about that.
It has the word neurotic right in the title, so I think we're okay. Well, you know, I think it's probably my upbringing is probably what made me who I am, just like a lot of dark comedians or something like that.
Can I ask, when did you get comfortable with being neurotic? When did you recognize, I'm a neurotic person, and the only way to really deal with this is to get comfortable with it and embrace it?
That's a really good question. I think I became...
Asking for a friend?
I think I became self-confident with my neuroses when I met my future wife. I think the fact that I call her Sweetie, so do the grips and electricians, but the fact that Sweetie and I could fall in love and be married and all that made me embrace my neurosis, because she's sporty and smart and beautiful and shouldn't be with someone like me, and the fact that she is made me confident. So
prior to that, even though you were shooting movies for the Coen brothers in the 80s, you were getting worldwide acclaim for those things, you did not find yourself to be a self-confident person. Although you had met Sweetie prior to that.
I had met Sweetie prior
later.
To that, but I will say I was a very neurotic mess. I would constantly throw up. I had a very nervous stomach. I was not self-confident. So Sweetie gets all the credit.
And now you don't throw up.
I'm a sympathetic vomiter. If I see, smell, or hear vomiting, I am there. But no, my stomach is back to normal. Thank you.
So you're welcome. So you started writing this book how many years ago, right? I mean, you talk a little bit about in the book that your editor basically sort of coaxed you into telling one story. The first story that you told was the porn shoot story that you started writing. Is that true?
All right, so here's what happened. I live in Telluride, Colorado, and there's two shoulder seasons where it's not beautiful, between when the snow is melting and it's spring, and then in the late fall. And so it was one of those shoulder seasons, probably 10 years ago, and I decided to just write the porn chapter just for myself. I shot 9 feature-length pornos in 9 days, which is probably a record.
That was the only time span that you worked in it?
Oh, God, yes. Please, yes. I always say that.
For a reason based off of the story,
Well, also, if porn was released with smell-o-vision, no one would ever go to a porn movie again. It's truly a horrible thing. So anyway, I wrote this chapter just for fun. And then about 5 years ago, I said to Sweetie, hey, read this and tell me if it's funny. We were in bed. She read the chapter, shaking the bed with laughter, and she's very critical. She used to be an editor, and she loved it. And I said, okay, good to know. I never thought I'd do anything with it. And then David Granger, former editor-in-chief of Esquire magazine, left Esquire, called me up, became a book agent, and he said, do you have a book in you? And I gave him the chapter, and he said, write me 2 more chapters. So I wrote the chapter that's called Barry Sonnenfeld, Call Your Mother, and I wrote the Fear of Flying chapter. We went to 6 publishers in New York. They all wanted to do it. And what made me feel really special is they all said, no ghostwriter. We want you to write it because you have a specific voice. And that was about 2 years ago. And I would sit down and write 35, 40 pages in a day. I never had writer's block. I'm writing about myself, and I'm an only child and Jewish, so what's not to write a lot about?
Also an only child.
Oh, really? But not Jewish?
Not Jewish, no.
No. But were your parents overprotective?
I would never, they did a good job. I would never define it as overprotective.
Do you really want your parents to do a good job? I don't know.
Here and there, they did a good job, right? Like, fairly functional in places, fairly dysfunctional in other places.
Yes, I would say that what they did give me is that neither one of them wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant. My mother wanted me to be some sort of artist, and my father said, figure out what in life will make you happy, and you'll figure out a way to make a living doing that, which is pretty great, although unfortunate coming from a man who was always in Chapter 11. So he figured out a way to have fun doing his life, but not making money doing
At the expense of everybody else around him.
Of course, because they were both narcissists.
When you started taking, I mean, basically you found what you liked by taking photos and becoming a photographer, and you loved street photography. And I love the way that you talk about how you quickly noticed that you liked things to be in the center of the frame.
That's right.
Which we see in so many of your movies. But how did you transition from taking pictures to being a DP? Was that, I mean, it seems like for a period of time, none of this stuff was in the cards or was planned. You were just taking opportunities as they came.
Absolutely right. I thought I wanted to be a still photographer. I loved the 21 millimeter lens, which is very wide angle. And then at some point I realized, A, I didn't think I was good enough, and B, I realized it was probably a more lonely profession than I wanted. I accidentally went to film school, mainly because it allowed me to spend 3 more years without looking for a job.
And you were conned by your mom that she would pay for it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, they had no money, and what was I thinking? So I took out a lot of student loans, and I would apply for another MasterCard and started to pay 18% interest on those things. But at film school, I discovered, cinematography is in many ways the opposite of still photography, because I discovered that what I loved about the camera is that you can move it, and still photography is all very static, and I became sort of this guy that became known for moving the camera a lot, whether it's Raising Arizona or 3 O'Clock High or Throw Mama from the Train.
Or even in Blood Simple, the first movie that you shot, where I don't know if it's Dan Hedaya comes out of the house in the beginning, but the camera basically like dollies, or it felt like a Raimi-esque sort of on the 2x4s kind of thing, where you like run into a is it a close-up of the dog biting him or something like that?
A close-up of his groin as Fran kicks him.
Yes.
Actually, very, very astute, because it was a shaky cam, which Sam invented, which is putting the camera on a very long board, like a 2x12, using a 9.8 millimeter lens, because the wider the lens, the more energy it has also. Not only is it less bumpy, but the more energy. Like if I'm on a 21 millimeter here, I'm seeing from your knees to your face. And with a small little move like that, I'm now in a close-up. If I was on a 100 millimeter from back there, seeing from knees to head, I'd have to dolly like 40 feet to get into a close-up, because the longer the lens, the more compression you get. So I discovered I was a wide-angle guy, and the problem is with wide angle, everything's in focus. So how do you tell the audience where to look? You either put everyone in the center, or you move the camera to say, come on, we're going here. So that's what I discovered. And to this day, I feel the camera can be a storytelling device and not just a recording device.
And, you know, one of the things that you say, not just about that time, but about your time as a cinematographer, is that at one point you realized that you were the type of cinematographer who liked talking with the directors about how they were going to edit the movie, how the shots were going to shape the story, rather than just sort of figuring out where to put it. And I think that's so interesting, because you got your start with the Coen brothers, who are recognized or thought of as visionaries, which can sometimes imply like not as collaborative as it sounds like the relationship you actually had with them.
Joe Ethan and I designed all the shots together. We had the same point of view about what a camera could do. We also believed totally in pre-production. Everything was planned out. Every shot was storyboarded with notes about where the camera should be and what it should do, and we had floor plans, and we really over-engineered all of our movies, because the worst place to ever make a decision in a movie is on a movie set, because you've got hundreds of people, you know, and they're getting paid money, and you're going to run out of light. So you want all your decisions to be done before you ever get there. You don't want to look out the window and see grips lying on furniture pads sound asleep while you're trying to figure out what the angle should be. So that's what Joel and Ethan and I did together, and we had the same exact aesthetic about the camera.
What was it like for you when you moved into shooting Miller's Crossing for them, which becomes far more long lens? Like you're using
right.
long lenses on that movie.
Man,
mostly.
you're good.
And it I mean, I don't think it removes your style, but there is something that is Sonnenfeld-esque about the cinematography of Blood Simple, Raising Arizona. You can track into Addams Family and Men in Black, but that's not so much there in Miller's Crossing, which, although is a beautifully shot film. What was that like for you at that point?
You know, there are two kinds of movies, funny movies and handsome movies. And we decided that Miller's Crossing was a handsome movie. So we used longer lenses. I still used a very slow film stock. It was ASA 64, even for night shoots, which is pretty incredibly, it requires a lot of lights. But for me, it's weirdly, and this will surprise you, I think it's the best looking movie I shot. You know, everyone thinks Raising Arizona, which was great, but for me and cinematographers, it's about lighting, really. And so I'm very proud of Miller's Crossing.
When you moved into directing, it's so surprising reading the book because you say you're not a cinephile of any kind, or you weren't at this time. But the way that you talk about prepping the Addams Family and the visual jokes that you had, I mean, specifically Angelica Houston in every shot to be framed like a silent movie star, or like, was it Greta Garbo that you used? I don't remember the exact reference.
Well, the
something like that.
Still photographer was Harrell, who had the very specific trolley bars which create light across eyes and dark forehead and chins. So it's more about the still photographer. But yes, Garbo, Harlow, all those.
But it seemed that you had a cinephile's vision for how a movie should come out. It never felt like you got on set and were like, well, whatever we could get, like, let's just try to get this in the can today.
Oh, God, you don't want to do that. No, that's a bad idea. I didn't see a lot of movies growing up. I was not a film fan. I was not a cinephile. But when I started to shoot, I developed a certain style. And Addams Family is a continuation of that. You know, there's nothing better than tracking behind Thing as he's racing through, you know, rooms. I guess I have an aesthetic, but I really have seen very few movies. You've seen 80 times more movies than I ever have.
Are you still that way? Are you still not a big movie watcher?
I'm not a big movie watcher. You know, I have a great screening room. So during, you know, award seasons, I get all the awards. My two favorite movies this year were Parasite and Jojo Rabbit. Easy choices, but love them. And I met Bong. He came to Telluride, which is where I live. I'm not a film guy. I love the Weather Channel. If I could meet anyone, and I'm a little bit friends with Brian Williams, and he knows this guy. I asked Brian, someday can you introduce me to Jim Cantori, who's one of the guys on the Weather Channel, and I'm a little bit friends with Al Roker. I put him in Men in Black as an alien. So if I could get paid my directing fee to be a meteorologist, that's what I would do.
Why? Where did that come from? Where did that obsession, how did it happen?
Well, growing up in Washington Heights, which is in Upper Manhattan, you see no weather, you see a lot of concrete. I think that weather is a living, breathing organism, and we don't give enough credit for it being almost an animal. You know, if you hear the descriptions of hurricanes and you know, it's all about the eye of the storm, and you know, it eats more moist water and gets bigger. I don't know. To me, it's not unlike an alien weather. And also, there's nothing better than sitting on your deck, looking out over the mountains of Telluride, and trying to figure out what the clouds look like. It looks like a dog eating a slice of pizza. Really? I thought it was a shark. No, it's a dog eating a slice of pizza. I don't know.
You know, going back and watching Addams Family and watching Men in Black, there's a a nostalgia was created in me for this period of time where it felt like, yes, the studios were trying to make tentpole movies, but they were also giving that to filmmakers who had ideas and vision. And we all have tendencies to sort of be nostalgic about the past, but it does feel to me like those tentpole movies don't necessarily have a signature style the way
Right.
that Men in Black did at the time, or the way that I guess Adam's Family wasn't necessarily a tentpole movie, but it's a studio family-driven movie. But there's a very distinct style. Was it hard to have that style when you were in the studio system at that time?
No, studios don't really understand what directors do. If it were left up to studios, they would only hire first-time directors so that they could control all aspects of the process. So they really didn't know what I was doing. On Adam's Family, I was hired by Orion, which was a very director-friendly studio back then. They went bankrupt halfway through our show, and we were sold to Paramount, and that's a long, complicated, sad story, but somehow we got through it. And then on Men in Black, we were not going to be the big movie of the year. We were totally under the radar.
Really?
Yeah, the big movie was going to be Jurassic Park, and there was 4 or 5 others, so no one was talking about Men in Black, and that was fantastic. You so want to be under the radar, just like you always want to be a pessimist instead of an optimist. And
With you on that.
yeah, it's win-win.
Yeah.
There's no upside in being an optimist.
No.
So yeah, only child.
Constant heartbreak. What do you want to do that for?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
You never want to say the team's up by 21 points and there's only 2 minutes left. We're going to win. Wait till you win, then say it.
If I'm right, I get to say, I told you so. If I'm wrong, I was prepared.
That's right. Exactly. That's why every time I get on an airplane, I say to my wife, this thing is going to crash. Because
Good for Sweetie.
Good
She
for
loves
Sweetie.
to hear that.
But she doesn't believe me, of course, because she's not Jewish. But here's the upside. If it crashes, right before it crashes, you get to elbow Sweetie and say, was I right or what? And if it doesn't crash, you get off the plane and you continue to live. Win-win.
Only a certain type of person would fantasize about the last moment of their lives being punctuated with being like, I was right.
Am I right? So yeah, Men in Black, in fact, for me, Men in Black is a small buddy movie. And one of the things I like about it is there's very little visual effects. Rick Baker, who's won like 5 or 6 Academy Awards, who did all the aliens and creatures on Men in Black, convinced me very early on, when you can, use puppets. So all the worm guys were puppets because the puppets are actually moved by real SAG actors with a sense of humor, that you can change things, you can give them lines of dialogues. The actors can actually act to these creatures as opposed to acting to green screen and then hoping that the visual effects people know comedy, which is rare.
Did you find that the time that you went to make Men in Black 3 that the studio system had changed and how movies are made had changed? Did you feel like you had, I mean, maybe just because you were under the radar with the first one, but did you feel like you had as much trust and freedom as you had coming after Adam's Family in those movies?
No, the more successful you are, the more the studio worries that you're going to screw it up the second time, and the more they want to take ownership of it and be the last person to urinate on it, just like a dog.
Yeah.
So each Men in Black got harder and harder to make because the studio got more and more nervous instead of the opposite, which is what you would think. It's just not the way they work, except there is one extraordinary studio, and that's Netflix. I did 3 years as a showrunner on a series of unfortunate events, and they were perfection. In fact, I showed them my cut of the first 2 episodes early on the first year, and they gave me notes. And I called up the guy in charge of our show, and I said, do you want me to make all these changes? Do you want me to tell you which ones I think won't work? Do you want to see everything? And he said, it's your show. These are suggestions. Do whatever you want. Which is extraordinary, and I think it's why they get so many great filmmakers wanting to work there is because they trust the filmmaker, which you should.
I loved a series of unfortunate events. I thought incredibly unique. There was nothing like that on television, streaming, and also did feel like a very clear distillation of how you see the world. But I am curious, you slept in a coffin while shooting it?
No, I didn't sleep in a coffin. I built a coffin. That I built.
Oh, okay.
Here's what happens. I love claustrophobic places. When I was a cinematographer, when everyone else went to lunch, I would find a table to sleep under, or a piece of set. And so on the 3 seasons of A Series of Unfortunate Events, where the couch was, I had them build a couch on top, but underneath there, you could hinge open this door and slide in and close it. And it was totally dark, and I would either meditate or nap in there during the lunch hour. And everyone was afraid I was going to suffocate, and they made me put fans in it, which I didn't want, because then you could hear a little bit of noise. And I had Sonics, that foam rubber to make it as quiet as possible. It's just who I am. So yes, I did sleep in a coffin-like device.
How do you sleep at night when you go to bed? Do you like wrap yourself in the covers and put them over your head, kind of thing?
Well, I do that, and I have a mask that has speakers, and I listen to books about volcanoes, because that's the only way I can fall asleep for some reason. They tend to be boring.
Have you run out of books yet?
No, I just listen to them again.
Oh.
Because at some point I fall asleep, so I never know on what page I fell asleep. So each night I'll start again, or I'll arbitrarily pick a chapter, but I'm not a sleeper, I'm a napper.
You told me in the green room that your favorite film of yours is Get Shorty. And that film is, I would say, the least Sonnenfeld-esque visually.
We call that Sonnenfeldian.
Sonnenfeldian? I like it.
Maybe.
I like it, sure. What made you go into that, wanting to shoot that in a very different way?
Scott Frank wrote an amazing script, and it was based on a fantastic book by Elmore
Developed by you, right? You found the book and brought it to Danny DeVito?
I found the book. I brought it to Danny, and it took us 5 years to get it made, because no one wanted to make an Elmore Leonard movie, because none had made money, and no one wanted to make a movie about Hollywood, because none had made money. But
you also weren't really a known director at that point when you started.
No, actually, I had done the 2 Addams Family movies. Yeah, but I hadn't done Men in Black, for instance. That script is so good, and the characters are so good. I found that the way to play the comedy was the way old movies like by Howard Hawks or Preston Sturges are done, which is let the comedy play out in 2 shots. I mean, I did a few interesting camera moves, but I thought it was more about character than about camera.
Yeah. I mean, you do have, I think, one great sort of push in on Dennis Farina's face at one point, don't you?
Yes, and there's an upside-down plane that writes itself.
That's right.
Which introduces us to Delroy Lindo, and there's a dolly zoom, which is an old Hitchcock trick when Yayo is afraid to go to the locker, and he's sweating bullets and seeing guns everywhere. But I did do some of that, but it's a fairly straight-ahead movie, but still beautifully lit and photographed. It's not like a 4-camera comedy. It's still a single-camera experience. Yeah.
The Get Shorty was the first in the string of sort of the Elmore Leonard successes in the 90s, right?
Yes. Then
Shorty, Out of Sight, Jackie Brown.
Right. That's right. Out of Sight, and then Jackie Brown. You're right. Yeah. And Quentin was very instrumental in us getting Travolta. Travolta passed on Get Shorty twice. And we got to Quentin, and Quentin loved Elmore and called Travolta, who had done Pulp Fiction, although it hadn't come out yet. And Quentin said, "This is not the movie you pass on. This is not the script you pass on. Do Get Shorty." So thank you, Quentin.
And what was it like working with Travolta at that time?
I've never met anyone who loved being a movie star more than John Travolta.
Absolutely. Yep.
And I've never met anyone who did more with walking than Travolta is an extraordinary walker. Every time he would walk and we'd have like Green Onions or, some other piece of music by Laurie, you just felt he was oozing self-confidence. And in fact, the last shot of Pulp Fiction, where him and Samuel Jackson are walking out of the diner, is hilarious because Travolta is walking so funny.
He's walking so confidently in those ridiculous clothes.
In those ridiculous
After
clothes.
this insane robbery has gone, philosophical robbery discussion has just taken place.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
You talk about working with Robin Williams as well, and how sort of on he was, and what that felt like.
Right.
I mean, I don't think you'd call yourself a comedian, but you definitely like to joke, and you write funny movies, or and not necessarily write funny movies, but you work with writers and you make funny movies. But there was something about working with Robin that the two of you didn't necessarily gel, right?
That's right. Robin is all about jazz.
Yeah.
He's all about give him a stick and say, do 10 minutes about the stick, and he will, and he'll be hilarious. But he needs to improv. And everything I do is all about control. It's all designed. The shots are designed. And I'm not looking for improv. And I'll tell you something else. You're working with kids in that movie. The Gornickes, the Jeff Daniels, Chris and Chenoweth family have kids. Robin Williams has kids. And kids learn their lines by rote. Mm-hmm. And they need the setup so they know when to come in with their line. And if you're improving, they don't know when to come in. Like I worked with Tim Allen also, who is similar in that if the question from Tim Allen or Robin was supposed to be, what's your favorite color? Don't improv, how old are you? Because the kid's waiting to say green, and it doesn't work. So Robin didn't like how controlling I was, and I don't blame him. He's a brilliant, brilliant comedian, great actor, but it was not a great fit. But I think he's really good in the movie.
How do you, when you're on set and you are not gelling with an actor, or maybe you're not gelling with one of your technicians on set, how do you end up working that out?
Well, I'm in charge, and I'm Jewish, and I'm an only child, so it's very easy. With actors,
no remorse.
No remorse. With actors, it's very easy because there's only one direction I ever give an actor, which is, let's just do it twice as fast. Because my theory is, and it's not specifically only me, but if an actor talks really quickly, they can't act. And I hate to see acting in a movie. So if they're talking fast, it takes away reaction and all that stuff. Like, I always say that I loved Breaking Bad, but I could have done all 5 years of that show in one season.
I'm with you.
Just by having people talk faster, and don't cut to a reaction of you and not have me talking over your reaction. Don't be silent and then cut to me. So for me, it's about pace. On a series of unfortunate events, I didn't direct every episode, but I would come to the set, and Melina, who played Violet, Melina Weissman, would come up to me and say, I didn't see you, but I knew you were on the set, because the director would come up to me and say, let's try one a lot faster, which meant the director saw me and said, oh boy, I better get one faster for Barry. And it's all about pace, and it's all about pace on the set, not in the cutting room, because if you have to create pace in the cutting room, cutting is the enemy of comedy. Comedy plays out best when it's rapid fire. So I like to pace the movie on the set and not be stuck trying to repace it in the editing room.
One of my favorite stories that you tell is about directing the Addams Family, and about how the head of the studio at Paramount, who after they bought it, everybody at Paramount loved the film when it was after the screening, but they were afraid to show it because the head of the studio didn't like you.
That's right.
And didn't like the idea of the movie, and wasn't willing to accept the fact that you had done a good job.
I don't think he wasn't willing to accept the fact. I think he genuinely didn't know it was funny. In fact, in my contract for Addams Family Values, it states that the head of the studio, a guy named Stanley Jaffe, had to bring his wife to the screenings so she could tell him when to laugh because she liked the movie. Uh, uh, he truly didn't like the movie. He didn't think it was funny. So none of the underlings, the head of production, the head of marketing or distribution, could laugh because Stanley wasn't laughing. They couldn't laugh. And then I had to go see them and get their notes, and they were suddenly laughing and patting me on the back. And it's
They're like, it's a hit. You have a hit movie here.
that's right, but Stanley didn't know that.
Did he not have a sense of humor in other regards, or was it this particular type of sense of humor that he couldn't?
You know, I referred to him as a sort of a combination of Mussolini and Dick Cheney. So you decide. Did he have a sense of humor?
I don't know. Dick Cheney had his
you're
own
right,
sense of
you're right.
humor, right? He
Yeah, no, he did. He
shot a man
his
in the
friend.
face and got away with it.
Yeah,
That-
good point.
To him, that was probably pretty
Yeah,
funny.
You're right. Touche.
So, unfortunate series of events has been done now for a couple years at this point, a year or two.
That's right.
Are you working on more movies? Are you working on more shows to do? Do you still want to keep directing?
Yes, I haven't retired. You know, I've been writing this book, and now I'm out trying to sell it. For me, and maybe for many other directors, the future is in television, not movies. The writing is better. There's strangely less pressure because the problem with studio movies right now is they release, let's say, 12 a year. That's one a month. And every time they release a movie, it could lose $50 million, and their job could be over. With Netflix or any of these streamers, they're releasing so much stuff. If you don't like the first episode of something, you don't go, I'm canceling my subscription to Netflix. So they're much more relaxed. Their job is not constantly at stake, which allows them to make interesting movies. The studios, it costs so much to market and distribute a movie, they only want to make IP movies, either sequels or famous books or comic books. So,
But you've never been one to shy away from IP, really, right?
well, what's the IP? Men in Black?
I mean, I
which
guess you
was a
created
graphic
the or that was the
that wasn't an IP.
unfortunate series of events.
Right, and by the way, I was fired off the feature.
Were you really? Wait, is that brought up in the book? I don't remember
No,
reading.
nope.
What happened?
Well, you can ask me anything. So here's what happened. Here's what happened. I read the books to my kid, and I loved them. And what I loved about the books is they posit that children are smart and capable, and all adults, whether they're evil or mean well, are equally ineffectual, which were my parents,
I
right?
was going to say, based off of reading this book, that sounds like your worldview. Yeah.
That's my parents.
Yeah.
So I loved it. And Scott Rudin, who produced the Two Addams Family, was producing the feature. And I was hired. We had Jim Carrey. And at some point, Scott quit. And I'll never know why he quit. It might be a budget thing. It might have been that he saw the writing on the wall. And the head of Paramount was a woman named Sherry Lansing, who had replaced Stanley. And Sherry said to me, honey, this movie is too expensive for dark comedy. There's never been a dark comedy that's made money. And I said, Sherry, I directed 2 of them for you, Addams Family and Addams Family Values. Those were dark comedies. She said, oh, they don't count. So she said, we need a partner. And I got her Sony, but she didn't like the Sony deal. I said, go to any studio you want except Amblin. Because if you go to Amblin, the producer, the head of Amblin at that time was a husband and wife named Walter Parks and Laurie McDonald. And they were the producers of the Men in Black movies, and we didn't get along. I think that if we hadn't worked together, we'd be really good friends. He's got a great sense of humor, but we didn't get along as a team. And I said, if you go to Amblin, Walter will fire me the next day. So she went to Amblin, and the next day, my lawyer called me and said, Sherry Lansing just called me and said, you quit. And my lawyer said, I said, no, he didn't. She said, okay, he's fired. What difference does it make? So I was kicked off of the movie. Cut to years later, Netflix buys the books because Paramount screwed it up and didn't want to do a sequel, buys the books, and
Because the movie didn't turn out that great. No offense to people who worked
Yeah.
on it, but I don't know if it did well. I don't remember.
it
if
did okay. The problem is the filmmaker made the movie about Count Olaf, which was Jim Carrey, and I always felt the movie was about the kids. And Neil Patrick Harris is fantastic in the show, but it still is driven by the kids. So I heard Netflix was doing it, and I got my way into that meeting, and I told them exactly the way I would direct it, that Lemony should be an on-screen presence, although not present in time, but visually present, even though he's telling the story from the future. Told him exactly I wanted to shoot it entirely on stage in Vancouver. And I even told the three executives where to sit so I could look at all three of them in one 3-shot. And I left knowing I had the job because I was so passionate about the books. And they hired me, and we went to Vancouver. We shot it entirely on stage. And I was lucky I got fired off of the movie because it deserved 25 hours and not 2 hours.
And you may not have had the energy to make the show after having made the movie, right? They may have done it, and you meant like, I already did that. I was already in that world.
Well, the thing is, I think that if I had done it, it might have gotten a sequel. I don't know, and it might never have gone to Netflix. But as I say in the book, you can never rethink anything you do in life because there's so many trillions of decisions made by you, made by the bus driver who didn't hit you, made by the bicyclist that didn't take the left turn there that would have run you over because they're late delivering the Grubhub stuff. So no matter what happens in life, even if I'm on a plane tomorrow, even if I have to elbow Sweetie and say, was I right? The plane's crashing. You can't go back.
When did you realize that you could write?
When Sweetie laughed when she read that chapter.
But not even for the book. Excuse me. I mean, like, you signed up to make Addams Family, right? And if I remember correctly in the book, you talk about how the script wasn't really there.
Right.
And you and another writer basically got, and Scott, I think as well,
Scott.
got the script to a good place. Was that a moment for you when you started realizing, like, oh, I can, maybe if I'm not going to sit and write a script, but I can shape a movie with a writer and I know how to write?
No, I think that's what directors are supposed to do, is shape the movie and know what's working and not working. I would not in any way, shape, or form call myself a writer on any of the shows I've done, even if I've suggested dialogue or even if I write dialogue. They're little things. I've never structured anything or never really sat down and really wrote, 15 pages. So I was not a writer. I was a director, and that's what directors do. And this is the first thing I've ever written.
It was very well written.
Oh, thanks. I kind of like telling stories. I used to tell stories with camera or with actors, and now I'm doing it with a typewriter. But I really enjoyed the process.
I have a question from Twitter. It's throughout the wide span of your career, what was the most challenging film to work on?
Boy, that's a tough one. They're all challenging in different ways. I think Men in Black 2 is really challenging because after the success of Men in Black 1, again, Walter and Laurie decided to develop a script and hire a writer and get a script without ever even consulting me, as if I had nothing to do with the success of Men in Black 1. And in fact, before I came on to Men in Black 1, and I quit Men in Black 1 to do Get Shorty, and then came back, the movie took place in Lawrence, Kansas, Las Vegas, Washington, all these other places. And I kept saying, no, if there are aliens, they're in New York because they can fit in without any disguise. And eventually, I won that argument. But for them to develop the sequel to Men in Black 2 without my involvement, and then me coming on and so disliking the script, and I tried to get it better, but we ran out of time, and they had a release date. So for me, that was a very painful experience. And Men in Black 3 was painful because, again, we started the process without a completed script. And I kept saying, without a completed script in a comedy, you can't have comedy callbacks. You can't have something in the first act that will call back in the third act if you don't know what the third act is. So the Men in Black movies were, I think, the most challenging experiences I've had.
Another question. It's when are we getting a Pushing Daisies revival? I need a reason to live.
There are many reasons to live. Someday Trump won't be president. Although I could be wrong about that, so I take that back. I take that back. I loved Pushing Daisies. I loved it. I loved working with Brian Fuller, who was the creator and showrunner of that show. I always thought it could make a great Broadway musical.
Oh, wow.
They're getting old, but, Ellen Greene is a Broadway actress and singer. Swoosie Kurtz, Lee Pace would be great. So I think we're past it because we're too old, and I don't see us restarting it. But to this day, Warner Brothers wishes we were still on the air. They were the studio, and there was a writer's strike that shut us down. And then by the time the strike was over and we had to start, it was very complicated. But I loved Pushing Daisies, and I loved the actors in Pushing Daisies. And I'll tell you one other story. Lee Pace, who I had never met before, we couldn't get an actor to be the lead. And Brian Fuller, who had worked with him on another show, said, "What about Lee?" I said, "Fine." Lee comes in. Lee comes in on a Sunday night, and Monday morning we have to bring him to Warner Brothers and ABC. So he comes to my suite in Burbank, where I'm in a hotel room, and the producers are there. And Lee reads the scene with a casting director, and I start to sweat. He's painfully slow.
Wow.
And I said, "Lee, you know what? You've got to do it again, but like 40 times faster." And he said, "Okay, but am I talking faster because I'm nervous, or am I talking faster because I'm hiding something?" And I said, "I don't care. Just talk faster. You figure it out." And he did it again. It was 18 times faster, not fast enough. We worked for hours, and he never got it fast enough. But somehow he went home, and that night it clicked in. And the next morning he came in and nailed it, got the part. And if you watch the opening the pilot episode of Pushing Daisies, he is talking so fast and so wonderfully, and I think it became his character, and I loved that about Lee, that he figured it out.
Did you ever feel like you had to explain to an actor why they had to talk fast for their character, or were you just kind of like, no, this is how I want to hear it?
Okay, very good story. Men in Black 3, Michael Stuhlbarg plays Griffin the Arcanan. And he's a quantum mechanic. He can see all possible outcomes of everything, right? And I kept saying to Michael, you got to talk faster. Michael, you got to talk faster. Never talked faster. Never talked faster. And then about a weekend, I went, "Hey, Michael, you know you're a quantum mechanic?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "So you see every possible outcome that could ever exist of every possible moment in history?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, here's the thing. Griffin knows that if he doesn't talk fast, by the time he finishes the sentence, there could be 8,000 other outcomes. So Griffin has to talk fast, because if he doesn't, whatever he's saying could be a totally different outcome." And Michael said, "Yes." And from then on, he talks so fast, so wonderfully. And I said to Will, why couldn't I have just said, Will Smith, why couldn't I have just said to Michael, talk faster? Why did I have to do all that work for him? And Will explained to me it's just not the way it works. But I so wish I could have just said, talk faster, and let him figure it out. But I actually fooled Michael into talking faster.
I think that's what most actors want. They want to be fooled into, and not like someone's playing a trick on them, but they want to be fooled into the place that they have to get.
Yeah, like motivation and all that kind of stuff. It's not my thing. Just talk faster. Just talk faster.
You know, we actually had an actor who was in his first role in a big movie was in Men in Black 3, Michael Chernus, and he was saying how he was on the rooftop and he was looking out at the set and he just blanked on everything and couldn't remember who he was, where he was, what he was doing. And Will had to basically, who was like, it's okay, we'll take it slow.
Right.
And he said, movies are made in pieces. You're going to be fine. And he was like, I thought I was done making movies forever after that.
I love Chernus in that movie. I just love him. We built a set which was on top of the Chrysler building, and Chernus is so brilliant in that scene. And Will loved working with Chernus, just loved it. And the two of them are brilliant in that scene together. I had no idea that he was blanking out, and thank you, Will.
Oh, really?
Thank you, Will, because Chernus is fantastic in that scene. Yeah.
Really great. Barry, I think I have to let you go. I think there's another interview coming up.
Oh.
But I've loved talking to you so much, and I really loved your book. It was such a wonderful read. It's called Barry Sonnenfeld, Call Your Mother. It's on shelves now?
Yes, and the Audible, audible.com, I read the book, which is sort of a different experience. Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you liked it.
The extreme experience of the book.
That's
Barry.
right, that's right. Me reading my voice in your head for 10 hours is really something special.
Well, I love the book, and I can't wait for the next show or movie that I get to watch that you get to make.
Pleasure.
Thanks so much, Barry.
Pleasure.